Welcome all. We're going to have a little discussion right now about organizational story, right? Organizational narrative. The idea of building culture and story and identity through the stories that we tell. This is really important and is becoming more important as our technological tools advance and spread and proliferate, and organizations rediscover the power of telling their stories, being able to interact positively with their communities, their stakeholders, their customers, and so forth. And the gatekeeper roles of the past being broken down and allowing everybody more access to their audiences, the people with whom they're working. Does anybody here know who Howard Schultz is?
Nope.
Howard Schultz is kind of an incredible genius, a really smart guy, and someone who deeply believes in story. And what's also interesting about him is he happens to be the founder of Starbucks. Next slide, please. So Howard Schultz not only founded Starbucks, well, I shouldn't say he's the founder, he bought it from the founders very early on in its inception. And he transformed this company into the incredible behemoth that we see today. But what we're really interested in is not how much profit Starbucks makes, but why they're effective at telling their story. And Howard Schultz is a CEO who is way ahead of his time in terms of understanding that story. Now, there's only probably one of us in this room really old enough to remember the pre-Starbucks era. That was a time when coffee was coffee. It was pretty boring. There was a Folgers commercial that came on television once in a while. Something about the best part of waking up might be Folgers in your cup, right? And people would drink it usually in like styrofoam cups, and it didn't taste very good. They would have it on these glass pots. They'd pour it in there. But the idea of quality coffee wasn't really that much of a big deal. And more than that, the idea of going to a coffee shop in America for something that was delicious, that improved your life, and maybe even a place where you could collaborate with others, that wasn't even thought of. That wasn't even an idea. Instead, you put a quarter into a vending machine and it poured hot water onto some coffee powder and you drank that stuff. And it was pretty bad. It was just a stimulant for the most part. But Howard Schultz saw something differently in that whole process. He saw an opportunity. And the reason that he saw it was because he had a cultural exchange that he didn't expect. In the early 80s, he went to Italy. And in Italy, they had a very different coffee culture at the time. And he noticed that on every block, for the most part, there was a place, and they called it a coffee shop, basically. And it wasn't a chain, it wasn't a mark, but it was just mom and pop proprietors. And when you went in there, it wasn't just coffee, it was other products. And they made whatever those products were right in front of you. They had baristas who did this work, they dripped these things. And they had people that were gathering there, talking about their kids, talking about their work, it was becoming a public place, a place where there was intersectionality, where there was a positive intercourse between people, right? And what he saw was we could do something like that here. But in America, the idea was something that no one really thought about. So when he told this story to the founders of Starbucks, they didn't buy it, they sold it to him at a low price. And then he took that from there. And what he had to do was begin building a story about Starbucks. And he did that, and he did it in a really powerful way. And fast forward to today, and what do we see when we go to Starbucks? How do we feel about Starbucks? Well, first of all, the products that are there are vitally important, right? We want to have those coffees. And if it's not Starbucks, it's somewhere else. We've created an entire market around coffee that was built on this culture of having coffee together, going out and getting it. And the Starbucks story goes much deeper. It goes into where we source our coffee, how we treat our employees, what their benefits are. All of that is part of the Starbucks story. So now today, if someone asks about what is Starbucks story, they're going to have a lot of those positive touch points. Now, what we may remember, some of us in this room, was in 2007-8, Starbucks was on the ropes. Something bad happened. The economy was going bad too. Howard Schultz had stepped away, much like CEO Steve Jobs had left Apple at a certain point and then saw his beloved product go awry, Howard Schultz had a similar experience with Starbucks. And suddenly there was a massive contraction in Starbucks. And what had happened before that, in the early 2000s, was Starbucks began branching out into all these other things, a lot of CDs, a lot of other ephemera, pick and save type products, right? They had basically watered down their brand in a zest for expansion that was driven largely by Wall Street. When Schultz came back, what did he do? Right off the bat, he made all these infrastructure changes, like we're going to now have the drip espresso machine, it's going to be positioned in a certain place, the barista is not going to be blocked from view, but all of it was built around the same concept. We've lost our way as being the place where people come for comfort, coffee, story, culture, and togetherness. That's what we want to be. And so he recreated that, and fast forward to today, 15 years later, the company's still thriving. There was this contraction. It looks different. It's tough to remember when you're in the middle of it, or when you weren't there at all. A lot of us are really young in this room. But Starbucks looks a lot different when you walk in now than it did in 2005. So that's interesting. What about us? What about what we do? Well, there might be a lot of implications about the power of story and the effectiveness of the way that we deliver public services. There's a story out there about public service. I think we all are pretty familiar with it. We'd like to hope that it doesn't really apply to us here, but we may do some collateral damage to that. Politics has become a dirty word. Right? Now, some could argue it has been for a long time. There are other periods, especially in U.S. history, when politics has been extremely divisive that people often forget. You know, in the early 1800s, I mean, there was stuff that might make people clutch their pearls today. Deep division and enmity at a national level. What we have now, which is really not different, but it's just taken a different form, we have a massive media apparatus that just thrives on conflict. That's what they push all the time. Now, of course, in 1810, there was something similar with, there weren't professional objective newspapers, there were newspapers that were organs for the party, and they all clashed in a similar way. But it was very divisive, it was very corrosive to our culture and our body politic. But we build a counter-narrative here at this office, and we have been doing it for a long time. Now the beauty is that we have a great leader who has established this foundation with which we work, right? Supervisor Joy has been in office for over 20 years, and he's never kowtowed to this level of disgust, of enmity, of divisiveness, right? He's always been someone who has fostered a different culture. But now, with a team like us, and with the tools available, we're enabled to share that story to a much greater degree. The only way that John was able to get that story out 20 years ago would have been whoever he's conversing with in time and space, in reality. Or if he was lucky enough to hook a news media company on to give him a television story that night, or in a newspaper. Of course, losing control of the narrative, but hopefully influencing it in a positive way. Next slide, please. So how do we do this, right? How do we create story? Well, first we have to understand what it is that people really, we have to understand our audience. What do people really resonate with? What works? Well, there was an incredible UCLA study in the 1950s, and I put those numbers there, 55, 38, 7. Those are about the percentages of what the viewers of a person giving a speech, what it was that they said resonated, or what it was that the study found that they remembered that resonated most with them over time. What do you think the content of the speech, which number do you think that represents? 55%, 38%, 7%.
I'm going to go middle and say 38.
Good guess, good guess. So the answer is 7, right?
Oh, way off.
The content very low, right? Now we'd like to think that us in an educated environment and You know, we're a more sophisticated audience. We'd probably be about 38%. Let's say that. Right on, Sonia. 55%, what was the most powerful thing that people took from a speech that someone gave? A communication that someone personally projected to them. What was the most powerful thing?
Physical appearance.
Yes, right? Not necessarily, not the exact word physical appearance, but body language, movements, appearance. Yes, right? The whole package, right? 38%, well, it's not the words, and it's not the physical appearance. What might it be?
The title.
Good guess, good guess. No, not the, I don't believe that's the answer, but that makes sense. The title is important, absolutely. The way you title something is, of course, going to influence the way the rest of any message is going to be perceived. But the answer to that is tone. Tone, voice, syncopation, you could say. But the bottom line is, forget the study, forget the science. The best way to understand this would be from the great poet Maya Angelou, who said, people will almost never remember what it is that you told them, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. We have to keep that in mind always as we're crafting our message. I'm not saying content isn't important. I'm saying that it's only one of an array of influences that are coming to the recipient of our message. And we have to understand that because our de facto angle is always the quality of the content. It is important. Sigmund Freud, the Iceberg. Sigmund Freud, incredible psychologist, 1895, his incredible book about dreams, and he was basically 120 years ago, it was radical, it was wild to even think that the majority of how we perceive, what we learn, what we remember, all occurs subconsciously. Things that are not in our conscious direction. His Iceberg, I said Iceman, the point is, our minds are this little tip of an iceberg sticking out of the ocean, and the rest of it is all beneath the ocean, right? And to appeal to that is what we're doing as communicators. And tools to do that, things like dual coding, increased stimuli, non-information database. So, what does this mean? This means don't load up your message with an essay or a book. Those have their place, right? But what we're really talking about, when I say dual coding, what I'm talking about is the power of multiple mediums in the same message, right? I'm talking to you and you're looking at me, and you're hearing what I say, but your mind is doing a whole bunch of other things. Mm-hmm. And in our messages on social media, for instance, we want to appeal to that. We know that what we have, let's say, for instance, John is saying, and how he's looking, we know those are good, but those are only a piece of what the massive subconscious is digesting. So, what other implications does that have? Well, think about the way our memories work, right? Think about where the power is. If I tell you the word aardvark, well, that's probably not a good one because that's unusual. You'll remember that. If I say cat, you probably won't remember that I said cat, right? Two days later, 2 weeks later, whatever. Pretty common, whatever. But if I say cat and I show you a picture of a beautiful kitty right next to it, you're almost definitely going to remember it, right? That's, and a lot of other things that go on that I don't even know about. But we're navigators looking for that positive message, and we're probing to some degree. This science is not as exact as we'd like it to be. Of course, it could be a scary world if it was. Data viz, by the way, another huge part of this, right? And what I mean by that is not a spreadsheet, right? But let's say, for instance, that fireworks, the use of illegal fireworks, which is a scourge on our community, is way down last year from this year, okay? I can say that, I can say it over and over again. And you might like that, you might even remember that, right? But what if I say it, and also I say it in a power tone, with a powerful message and gesticulations, and I have a data viz right next to me that shows you a graph going like that, with a big firework going off, and it's gone, right? Powerful, positive messages. Next slide, please. How is it that we appeal to people? What kind of tools do we use when we're trying to resonate, right? Well, these are just a few. Again, these are common in the world of marketing and business. That doesn't mean that they don't have implications and importance for the work in public service. Ultimately, this is about building influence toward positive ends. Reciprocity, right? What do we think about? Anybody have an idea of what reciprocity means in this context?
When you give something, you get it back.
Absolutely, right? If I just met you and I ask you to get back on the bus and go bring something from home, come back, you're not going to want to do that very much. In fact, you might even say no, right? But if the day before I went and bought you lunch, that might be a different story, now, wouldn't it, right? Commitment, right? When people feel like they've committed to something, they're loath to change course, right? That's why you retain your voters, for instance, right? So once you've gotten people to commit in some way to this cause, right? Join me in this. Let's fight for this. Sign. That's why it's so powerful to say, here's this is an amazing tool, right? Here's this on social media here, sign this, takes 2 seconds, right? It's not the signature per se, sometimes it's important, well, it might be. But just the act of you taking 2 seconds to digitally sign something, you've signed up, right? Again, not on the tip of the iceberg, but that subconscious one. You don't want to get off that team anymore. Social proof is a big one. Anybody? Well, I need to. This is one trick pony Trump's favorite trick.
Like everybody's doing it, yeah.
Everybody knows, right?
Everybody knows. Everybody's doing it, yeah.
Yep. So now, please don't let that atrocious, egregious example taint our vision on this. But the point is that we are social beings, social animals. We've evolved over this. All of this, by the way, is evolution over tens of thousands of years. We are beings who want to be with other beings, right? I don't want to be standing. That's why I feel nervous standing here talking to you, right? Because I'm apart. You're all looking at me. I'd be much more comfortable if I was, nestled between Caden and Ashir, but I'm not. Okay, but that's okay. The point is, we like to be part of a team. Okay, liking. This is big. This is why social media is so important, right? Get people to like things. Loathe to change course again. Authority, a big one, right? And this one, presidency has burned this down. This is bad. This is a troubling sign for our American democracy. We hope to restore this in some way. Well, that's beyond our purview now, but we can help restore public service here at this level with John. Now, fortunately, John has been putting in great work to establish his authority for a long time. But the point is, whatever John says has greater value than someone with less authority in the eyes of the public. Right? It's a powerful resource on which we trade. And we don't want to tarnish it in any way. Scarcity. This one, certainly much more marketing context, but it matters now, right? If I say, come on in, we're giving out free test kits right now, right? Isn't this great? We're helping the public with public health tools so that fewer people get this terrible disease. Well, if I say, everybody come on in, we have them, people are going to come, right? What if I say, they're about to run out? They're going to start beating down the door, right? Next page, please. So, ask yourselves, what's your story, right? Peripheral direct, that's talking about, appealing directly to someone, and then the peripherals, the data viz, the other images, whatever, right? Now, this is more, I want to talk a little bit just briefly about us personally, right? So, we all work to burnish the communication of this office in a productive way. However, our lives go on beyond this office. Right? Even my life, right? Even though people like Sonia and I and Tanya spend most of our lives here, we have lives outside of the office also. You guys have greater lives, greater opportunities, more time outside of this office, and this office is a short stint to begin with, right? So we have to be thinking about, the messaging is not just something that we do in service of this office. That's a really important work. But we also have to message in service of ourselves. Who are we? How are we going to be successful to achieve our dreams, to achieve the ambitions, the goals that we have? Well, more than ever before, these things are going to become important, right? I put metaverse because that's coming, right? We're all doing these Zoom meetings right now. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. No one really does. But as time goes on, a much greater degree of our lives is going to be lived in a different dimension, right? So on that dimension, these tools are all the more important. And the messages we're being able to give people with whom we're working, with whom we wish to work, with whom, think about dating sites, with whom we want to love, whatever, right? All of it exists this way. Think of it as, this is 50 years ago and it was the clothes and cologne that I wore or something, right? These things are more important for our future. So that's what all that's about. I think that's the last slide. Is there another?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Oh, that is the last slide.
That's the last one.
Wonderful. So, with that, we are at 2 o'clock.
Can we just give a round of applause?
Okay.